I'm delighted to be joined for this fantastic panel by three excellent panelists. To my immediate left is Jill Normington. She is a principal at Normington Petts and has been in the public opinion and campaign game for 20 years. Next, we have Austin Keyser, who is the political and legislative director of the IBEW, and he spent 6 years as the Midwest political director for the AFL-CIO, which is fairly relevant information for us to all to get. And before that was a working electrician. And then at the end is Mayor Anna Tovar of Tolleson, Arizona. She's been mayor since 2016, and before that was the minority leader in the Arizona State Senate and the head of the Latino caucus. I want to mention one thing before we continue because it involves many of you. Anna is a member of a group called the New Deal. And if you don't know the New Deal, you should. Debbie Cox Bolton and Helen Milby are here. They run it. They're fabulous. They'd be happy to tell you about it. And the New Deal not only has wonderful leaders like Senator Coons is a co-chair, I think, but they have people like Steve Benjamin and Stacey Abrams and a guy named Pete from South Bend, Indiana have been New Deal leaders. So they're pretty good at spotting talent, and 20 of those very talented members are here, so we're delighted with that. Acuna set the bar pretty high, complete sentences and no BS. So that is your charge, panel. We are here to talk about the economy, and I want to set the tone. The economy grew at 3.1% in the first quarter of this year. It's the longest expansion on record. The labor market has had 104 consecutive months of job gains. 20 million jobs have been created since the end of the recession. Unemployment is 3.6%. Hourly wages are up. Thank you, Obama. But the problem is that that's not how a lot of people are going to see it. They may say, thank you, Trump. So the question is, nobody in this room is cheering for the economy to do worse. At least if you are, don't do it out loud. There's a lot of people who have to live in this economy, and as political leaders, we cannot hope for bad things to happen. But we do have to confront the fact that the economy is relatively strong at the top line. And so I want to hear from you, how do we do that? So Jill, let's start with you. You spend a lot of time looking at public opinion data. How are people actually feeling about the economy, and what can Democrats who are running for office learn from that?
Well, there are a couple of numbers that I think are important for us to understand in the context of what you said. And one of them is the president's overall job approval number, because the economy is actually baked into that number already. And his job approval has been hovering somewhere around 44 for the better part of 6 months. Yes, it goes up a couple of points, down a couple of points, but on average, that's where that number is. But his job approval number on the economy, despite all of these pretty good numbers, and I would add to the fact that real wages are rising for the first time in a very long time, and that is absolutely having an impact. But his job approval on the economy, despite all of these good numbers, is only about 51. That is by far the highest number of any of the individual job approval ratings. The president, it's a little bit of a mixed bag, because we can't actually trust the polling data. This is very hard for a pollster to admit. You can't actually trust the polling data on the state of the economy. I'll give you a really good example of what I mean, and this exists out there in the public sphere a lot. If you ask people how the economy is doing, you get extraordinarily different answers based upon the partisanship of the person who's actually answering that question. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, what we got were people's real accurate interpretations. I do a lot of work across the Midwest, and in one district where I've been polling for a long time, we've been asking, how is the economy doing? And in September of 2016, all of the Republicans, about 20% of them said the economy was headed in the right direction. And in February of 2017, 80% of the Republicans said the economy was headed in the right direction. And let me tell you, in that part of Northwest Indiana, the economy was the same. And so you have to be clear that the polling data are very influenced by the partisanship of the people who are answering those questions. And so some of those top line numbers, they do not tell the story. What you have to get to are qualitative answers out there actually talking to voters, and they are experiencing two very different economies. They see the news, voters out there, that the economy is doing well, that the stock market is in good shape, that the unemployment rate is low. But if you get beyond that point and you actually ask them what is like for them on an everyday basis, people continue to struggle. And it's not because they don't have a job. They absolutely do. 2020 is not a jobs election. It is the cost of everything else election. And at the top of that list is healthcare. Healthcare is absolutely an economic issue, and the cost of drugs, of co-pays, of premiums, you name it, the cost of all of those things is far outpacing the small increase that we're seeing in wages. And that is where we are with this economy. You have to get past the top and dig a little bit deeper.
Austin, I saw you nodding a lot as Jill was talking. You are obviously on the ground in the kind of center of the target of the battlegrounds for 2020. What are you hearing from union members and their families and others about the actual state of the economy?
Yeah, I would say the most thing I was nodding about it is a mixed bag, right? There's nothing that's sort of a telltale across all of our industries. Just in the IBEW alone, we have members working in construction, which is booming. Construction's booming everywhere. We can't get enough construction workers. So we have the upper hand at the bargaining table. We have, it's a good time to be a construction worker. On the other hand, if you're in utilities, which a lot of our members are, about a third of them are in utility operations, you feel threatened right now. You feel threatened a lot by the left and talks of sort of the Green New Deal and those sort of things that threaten the very jobs that feed their families and are usually the highest paying family sustaining jobs in the community that they're in. And that's across the South too, right? So you're in the South now. Union density is not that high, but we represent over 92% of the investor-owned utilities in the country. So some of the only union jobs are these high-wage jobs in very skill-set occupations that threat of being displaced, right? So not unlike any other transforming part of the sector, it's a threat to them. So they feel threatened. They feel threatened by, they did going into the last election cycle after the Clean Power Plan. Right? They felt like a lot of businesses made market assumptions based on the Clean Power Plan actually going into effect, and places like the Midwest, where everybody knows performed dramatically different than what it should have. And big part was because of the threat that so many workers felt in their communities, and not just them, but their families, and the industry and the small businesses that are supported by those industries and those large industrial facilities that have already been hit by bad manufacturing. You tie TPP on top of that in the end of the Obama administration. You had a lot of people going into that election really feeling threatened. We've seen it happen with our manufacturing jobs. Are we seeing it now with our industrial base? The jobs that were never supposed to leave. So, and then healthcare. You tackle on healthcare. If you don't remember, it was a Cadillac tax. They called it a Cadillac tax. I call it more like a Chevy Cruze tax. But they're going to tax at 40%. The benefits in an industry that invented employer-based healthcare. Right, so these multi-employer bargaining folks were going to be hit with a 40% tax. That is a direct economic threat to me, and it's amazing when you have somebody who has some of the best healthcare in the country also telling us that healthcare is their number one issue. Right, that's a tell. You can't. Why are they so concerned about healthcare? They have the best healthcare in the world, or in the country at least. So how do you balance all these things? It's difficult. It's especially difficult in the key battleground states. When you had Donald Trump, who doesn't speak in complete sentences, but does speak in sound bites, standing in Michigan while the Hillary campaign was off trying to expand the map because they thought they had a slam dunk, standing in places like Michigan with some Wisconsin media market covering it, saying things like, we used to make cars in Flint and you couldn't drink the water in Mexico. Now you can't drink the water in Flint and we make our cars in Mexico. I'll change that. Well, if nobody else is talking to them, they're going to look for who's talking to them. And that's what the Democrats have to get back to, is an economic message that brings us all together. I've heard it said several times, the Democratic Party is a big tent. It absolutely is. If there's one thing that everybody wakes up in the morning thinking about is, can I pay my rent? Can I afford my car payment? Can I send my kids to preschool today so I can go to work? All of those basic essential, I'm not to get too nerdy here, but everybody remembers Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? There are certain things that motivate people very strongly, and the Democratic Party seems to be in the middle, speaking to the middle class, to people who are secure economically, who tend to think about broader social issues or are motivated by those things. And that's just not where the economy is right now. People are motivated by fear, and the Republican Party has been very good at it.
Anna, you are the mayor of a town in Arizona which is obviously at the kind of cutting edge of maybe a political transformation. But you, as mayor, are hearing from people with real needs every day. You know, the mayors are as close to the people as you can get. What are you hearing from folks about what's going on in their economy?
Well, I'm hearing stories of teachers that are working 2 jobs to make ends meet. I'm hearing about families that need to live together because they can't afford to live alone based on their income as well, too. I'm hearing from constituents that are having a hard time buying medication, and they're actually rationing that medication of saying, okay, I have enough for my insulin, but I only have enough for 15 days instead of 30. So what I'm going to do is take it every other day as well, too. They're having issues of accessing affordable health care as well, too. These are just real issues beyond what you see in the news that are affecting people that I think have them in this rat race where they're trying to make ends meet, and they're not truly looking outside of that because their number one worry is about their kids, providing shelter, providing food, and a safe place. So it is troublesome to see that this is happening not only in my city, but cities across the nation as well too. And so it's, you know, we're faced with a large task at cities as well too, in providing the best that we can and the services that we can for our constituency.
Jill, you noted that where you stand on the economy is entirely where you sit on the political spectrum, or not entirely, a lot of it is. Given that, the Trump partisans are going to say the economy is great, and Trump haters are going to say the economy stinks. What are you seeing in data that would suggest a narrative for Democrats on the economy, given the top 9 numbers look pretty good, but that the lived reality for a lot of people is very tough? How do you think Democrats ought to square that circle?
I think we have to be in some ways acknowledging of the facts on the ground. It is folly for us to suggest that the economy is not in good shape. I don't think we should be in the business of trying to convince people that, you know, the economy is not in good shape. I think we need to remind people, if we are going to be successful in 2020 and discuss the economy, we need to remind people of what the everyday experience is like, and not let folks focus on a stock market that is fundamentally actually not affecting them in large part. Austin exactly hit the nail on the head. When you actually get in rooms with people and talk to voters, and this is across the country, so long as you are a voter who is in some way economically insecure, when you talk to them, it is all about, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to pay the bills this month. It is a very month-to-month situation for most of Americans, and our candidates need to recognize that that's actually a large segment of the American electorate. And those voters who may have, for those reasons, thought about voting for Trump in 16, might have actually pulled the lever for him in 16, are not in fundamentally different economic shape now than they were back then. And we need to have conversations with those voters about the cost of things. I'm going to sound like a broken record here because the data are unequivocal about bringing the idea back to how much things cost. For most of these voters, it's about the money leaving their pocket, not the money coming in. A small raise, whatever sort of tax benefit, people may have gotten from, the $50 they got from the GOP tax bill was not enough to compensate for the fact that their health insurance premiums went up by another 25%. It was not enough to compensate for the fact that in our urban communities, our suburban communities, that the cost of rent is out of control. I mean, it's great for construction workers, but it makes the cost of housing a real and significant issue. I'm seeing housing costs show up in open-ended questions across the country in ways that I'm not used to seeing. I haven't seen in probably a decade. And in important battleground states like Arizona and Nevada, the housing costs are out of control. So housing as an economic issue, healthcare as an economic issue, and interestingly, if this happens to be your thing, climate is actually easily constructed as an economic issue. What it costs to repair the damage, and particularly across the Midwest, where we've seen once in a lifetime, once in a century floods now 3 summers in a row, we can actually make plain to people the costs of climate change in their own communities. So I think all of these things that we sometimes think of as niche issues are actually bread and butter economic issues.
It does seem like Trump's been president for 100 years, but actually he has not. Austin, what about globalization? You touched on this earlier. Obviously, for organized labor, that has been a third rail in a very significant way. But now we have a Republican protectionist president. We did not think those existed in nature, but somehow we have one. And he's doing all kinds of crazy things. And to Jill's point, some of what he's doing could well raise the cost of living for people. So how do we grapple with globalization in talking to your members?
Yeah, globalization is a complicated thing because we are not fundamentally opposed to trade. We're opposed to bad trade deals that don't raise the standards for workers around the world, don't apply the same sort of mature economic features that our country has, such as the EPA and things of that nature that generally rise the cost of business. Goods are going to cost more if they're built in a way that we demand in this country, but we're too happy to sort of cover our eyes and say, if we can't see it, children must not be working in sweatshops, right? So that's just not the reality of the situation. So with that, I will say this. We have long fought and struggled with trade deals. It's been a fight that we've had with Democrats. Again, mentioning what I was talking about with Obama going out in the last administration, the biggest fight that we had as labor was TPP and trying to block it. It would have covered a third of the world's economy and some very low road countries that would have done anything to attract our businesses there to undercut us. And there was no standards in it that we knew of, right? We never really saw the actual language. Nobody did, except for bits and pieces of it that were leaked strategically. But NAFTA is the same way, right? So now we're at the table on NAFTA. And for the first time, we're actually talking about not just labor standards, but enforcement of labor standards. And now would the Trump administration like to speed this up and sort of stop the twisting that we're having, because I think he's getting pressure from the business community to not do it, so not to do that. But we're going to continue to demand that not only does Mexico pay their workers a fair wage. It used to be, Mexico used to be the highest wages in South America before NAFTA. Now they're the lowest. And that's because it's their way of subsidizing, with getting around sort of the triggers where you're not allowed to subsidize as a government industries, is to keep their wages low. And we can't continue to watch that happen as a trade union movement globally, domestically, anywhere. And to the extent that it undercuts us, I mean, there's no doubt that we've lost so many manufacturing jobs. In the IBEW, we had at one point over 400,000 advanced manufacturing jobs. We have 30,000 now. 30,000. Those advanced manufacturing jobs left, and those were the good, high-paying manufacturing jobs. So you still have some auto, and you still have some other things that we're trying to protect, but we struggle with it to the terms that our members like the fact that he's reopened NAFTA, right? And that Democrats gave it lip service for so many years and sort of wore it as a brand. And they're being punished for it. We have right now the lowest party ID in the labor movement. I won't speak for all the other unions, but in the IBEW, the lowest party ID that we've probably ever seen. They're not turning into Republicans, but they're not calling themselves Democrats anymore. And so it's because they don't feel like Democrats speak to them. And they send Democrats in, Democrats that we're going to be your champion. They don't want a champion, right? They don't want a champion in the member of Congress, maybe a little more of a champion and a president. What they want is the ability to create wage equality around the country through collective bargaining. And we all forget that. People want to fight for themselves. They don't want a handout. They don't want some of the things we've heard about, like a guaranteed wage. All that stuff's great, and it sounds fluffy, and just transition, and all that things sound great. People want the ability to fight for themselves. So if you're looking for the red meat, they want something like the PRO Act that's introduced in the House right now. They want that leveling in the industries for labor unions to be able to stand up and fight. And keep in mind, as a Democrat, when there's more of us, there's more of you. You know, I'm a 39-year-old white male. My peers in the Midwest, how do they vote? They're heavily Republican, heavily Republican, unless they're a union member. Then they outperform by almost 30 percentage points. Just simply because they're more stable and more secure economically. They feel they're more secure economically, and they're making better wages, and they're more educated. We educate our members about their occupations and their industries and what happens there. They tend to get more engagement about what it means, what the global perspectives mean on their particular job. So I say that we need a fair fighting field. That's what workers want. They don't want somebody to go be a champion and hand them some healthcare bill or something else that can be taken away tomorrow. They want the chance to codify things in a collective bargaining agreement, stand up for themselves.
Anna, we heard Austin talk about how the label, that D next to your name as a political leader for union households in the Midwest has a complicated set of things that come with it. What does it mean in your community to be a Democrat, and what do people want from their Democratic leaders?
I would say in Arizona, having served at the state legislature, I served when I was in the super minority, and we were called the Pizza Caucus because literally we shared a pizza. We've come a long way since then, and I think the way that we've grown as well is presenting ourselves and our party as one that represents everyday Arizonans, everyday families who are struggling. We want people to succeed, and if they're going to play by the rules and be able to, work hard, they need to, show that success at the end of the day. And I believe, there are communities and families that are out there as well too that just want a fair shake. They want to know that if I'm going to work hard, I should be getting paid, what I should be getting paid, and even those who are women as well too, with those inequalities. So it's providing that platform for them to know that if we're in office and we're representing you, we're going to represent you to the best of our ability and give you that opportunity to succeed. We may not win on every single battle, but we're here to represent you. We're here to be your voice, and we're here to make sure that you have a fair share in making sure that your family succeeds in Arizona.
Let me follow up with you, because Austin made a point about his members and the folks where he lives. They don't want handouts. They want, they want a level playing field. Mm-hmm. How do you think voters in your area respond to Democrats' offers that things are going to be free? I mean, do they buy it? Do they think it's about them? Do they think it sounds good? What do you think about that?
Well, for my community, we're a predominantly Latino community, and when you talk about giving something, I know as a culture we're very proud, and we want to work hard and earn our keep. So I would say that message probably doesn't resonate well in our community of Latino community, because they don't want it. They don't want handouts. They don't want to be taken for granted and saying, here, if you're given X, then you'll be happy. No, I think the approach is, let us be part of the conversation. Let me earn, what I need to earn, and let's make it better for everyone as well too. So I don't, as you said, that message doesn't resonate as handouts. They want to work towards it and be proud of that.
All right, we only have a couple minutes left, so we're gonna do a little scenario here. Each of you have 1 minute with a major presidential candidate, and your job is to tell them one thing about what they should be saying, either a narrative or an idea, on the economy. Doesn't have to be the only thing you would say, but what is one thing you would offer as guidance to our candidates in, connecting with everyone in Jill's case, and Austin in your case with folks in your community, and Anna in yours? You have 10 seconds to think about it. Who wants to go first?
I'll go ahead and go first,
right.
Matt. I would say to the nominees is the way to win is by going to Main Street here in every city in America and learning about Main Street. I think you'll learn a lot in regards to how things are going with small businesses, in regards to our community members that are there, to the voters. They'll be able to tell you, what is working, what is not working. They'll be able to tell you about healthcare and about education and why they have to work 2 jobs. So I feel that as small cities, we have always been there for our economy when the recession hits, and we're the ones that turn it around quickly for our constituency. So I feel as a candidate, spend your time on Main Street listening, and then formulate your policies and your ideas based on those issues and needs that everyday community members are thinking about. Those are the issues that are keeping them up at night, that they can't sleep. Listen to them and then take action based on what you're hearing from everyday Americans on Main Street.
I would say to remember that the labor union movement is a solid base for the money-wise, volunteer-wise, infrastructure-wise, the Democratic Party, and it always has been. And it's been taken advantage of for a long time. And so keep in mind that it doesn't matter if you're black, white, Latino, if you're gay, straight, it doesn't matter. If you work in the same workplace, you get paid the same wages. You want wage equality? That's wage equality. You want health care? That's how you get health care. You want pride in your work, dignity in your work? That's how you get it. And that one thing is it can transform the entire economy if we just get out of the way and we repeal some bad policies federally. We talk about those bad policies and we just get out of the way of it and let it happen, right? And workers at the highest point in modern history support labor unions in the general public. So many people say they want to belong to a union, especially young workers who want new forms of unionism, guilds and things like that, but we're prohibited under federal labor law from being able to make those things happen. So in the economy, there's no more powerful force than the workers to balance it out and to make it more even. So if we have this inequality, the only way to make it equal, and the only way in history has shown to make it equal, is through a trade union movement, and it's not by giving things. It's not by passing a piece of legislation that can be repealed or watered down or administered in such a weak way that it's ineffectual. It's by giving those workers the ability to go in, look their bosses in the eyes, and say, you're not paying us enough to consume those goods. Globalization, you talked about, the prices are raising, could raise for consumers. It shouldn't matter that much. Even though the wages have gone up, real wages have on the rise just slightly above inflation for the first time in 3 decades. Workers still have not had a raise in 3 decades. And we've replaced that with consumer credit. And so they're all living a middle-class lifestyle, right? But they're all scared to death that they're going to lose that job. So no matter how much of a pay raise you give them right now, only thing they're going to do is service their debt with it, and they know if they lose that job tomorrow, they're bankrupt. So it's a company store. It's a global company store. Workers know that. We have to get back to messaging on that, talking directly at that, and prescribing collective bargaining as a solution to so many of the social ills that exist, especially in the economy.
Jill?
I think mine is a little bit, it's more about tone than content. My advice to candidates is to do a lot of what Anna was suggesting about talking to people inside of their localities and listening, but it is also about how you have those conversations with voters. I think a lot of times we spend time as candidates trying to offer prescriptions when at the end of the day, what most people want is to be heard. They want to feel like they're being listened to. And so for me, my advice to candidates when they're out there talking about the economy is to be cognizant that the economic situation that most people in America, and I mean that in the most mathematical way possible, find themselves in, is not like the situation that a lot of your friends find themselves in. Most Americans are $500 away from economic catastrophe. They are one busted transmission. They are one broken air conditioner away from economic catastrophe. And my comment to candidates is to understand that fundamental fear that runs through the majority of Americans where their own personal economies are concerned, and to have that conversation with those voters in those communities, understanding that your job there is to make them feel heard. It's to make them feel listened to, that the person who ultimately is advocating for them in the White House actually hears that and is taking it with them every single day. So it's much more about tone and listening than it is about content for me.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking this wonderful panel.